So welcome to week nine of our course. Um, and our topic is ecological environment, cultural rights, and traditions. That the environment, the ecological environment, has an influence here on our culture and traditions. That much as it may not dictate, the ecological environment, interacts with humanity, and so because of that interaction, and the economic activities and the social activities are shaped, through that particular interaction. But basically, we will interrogate this, of course. Um, we are not saying it does that, but we wish to interrogate this in this particular course. So the ecological environment acts as the silent architect of human civilization, shaping the contours of culture, traditions, and customs. Yeah. So we are saying that the environment has the potential to shape our traditions and beliefs. So what are our expected learning outcomes? Analyze the cultural core by synthesizing Julian Stewart's theory of cultural ecology with the Adage 2014. So Julian Stewart is our major scholar in this particular class, examining how the harsh, precarious landscape of Olekulets Maasai territory necessitates a rigid social hierarchy and the nomadic traditions. So I want to see how the ecological environment affects the traditions in Kulet's blossoms of savanna. Explore how the Somali desert scarcity drives culture that treats women as portable assets in Faras from the Crooked Rib. So our two books here are Faras from the Crooked Rib and Orekulet's Blossoms of Savannah. So this is Julian Stewart. Julian Stewart, one of our major theorists. So according to Julian Stewart, of course, he came up with a theory in cultural ecology, which revolutionized anthropology by moving away from environmental determinism toward a more nuanced understanding of how humans interact with their surroundings. So, according to Stewart, the environment does not dictate culture, but he argues that it is a creative process, an adaptive response that culture that results is an adaptive response to the environment. Yeah, that culture is a response to the ecological environment. So that if people live in a very, very cold place, the way they behave, their way of life will differ significantly with the people who live in a very, very, very hot place, in a very, very hot place. So according to Julian, these are some of the tenets that, we put forward. One is the cultural core. According to him, certain features of culture are more fundamental than others. The core consists of the constellation of social, political, and religious patterns. That the political, the religious, and the social are very central in the lives of a society. And these patterns here are most related to subsistence activities and economic arrangements. That the religion of the people, is closely linked to the economic activities. That the political life is very much related to the subsistence activities, which are determined by the ecological environment. So the mountain becomes very important, for example, to the people of central Kenya, if the economic activities are related to it. So if there are farmers, the mountain will become very important and it will hold a spiritual significance in their lives, Yeah, so the pumpkin, for example, if you look at Wole Soyinka's works, the pumpkin becomes very central. The pumpkin becomes very central in Soyinka's works because of its economic importance to the community. So the spiritual significance of the pumpkin is related to the economic significance of the pumpkin. Then you have behavioral patterns and subsistence. For example, if food source requires collective hunting, the culture will naturally develop cooperative social structures and shared rituals. So people become very social. They share everything. Yeah. if the source requires, collective, a um, collective stance, then multilinear evolution. So different cultures follow different paths depending on their unique environments. So societies in similar environments may develop similar cultural types through parallel evolution. Yeah, so they may not really develop, systematically. They may not develop as a group. They may not really develop as a group. They may not develop as a group. They may not develop as a group. That's what we are saying. That they will develop independently, but acquire similar traits. Then environmental possibilism. Stewart moved beyond the idea that nature is a static backdrop. Yeah, so culture is the result of the specific choices a group makes to exploit environmental potentials. Yeah, so the community will make certain choices to exploit the environment, and those choices are now what constitutes culture. What constitutes culture? Yeah. So for example, um, why is it in some societies we have a lot of harvest ceremonies? Why do they celebrate harvest? Because there is a harvest which arises from the ecological environment. There are seasons for harvesting, and when that season comes, they have to come together to celebrate, you know, and also practice certain rituals to thank their what? To thank their creator. And even the creator may be given names depending on the economic activities and depending on what the people need. What the people need. So let's look at now Adagi 2014. So based on the research paper by Adage 2014, infabulation among the Afar pastoralists of Ethiopia is influenced by the natural environment through several specific ecological and geographical factors. So among these people, Adaji carries out a study among the Afar people of Ethiopia, and he comes up with a number of conclusions, to show why they practice female circumcision. So, for example, he talks about a pastoralist mobility and resource scarcity, that the Afar people live in a flat and arid landscape with low rainfall, leading to a livelihood dependent on pastoralism and high mobility. So because of the rain, because the ecological environment does not provide enough rainfall, they have to move from place to place, to get rainfall. So this harsh environment necessitates a rigid social structures. Because the environment is harsh, the people have to be rigid to navigate their existence in the harsh ecological environment. So this harsh environment, so this re- so it- so this harsh environment now causes rituals like in infibulation or female circumcision, which functions as a mechanism for extreme social cohesion. So it enables extreme social cohesion and the management of reproductive rights. That for people to be very close, now that the place is sparsely populated, which arises from the harsh ecological environment, they have to practice reproductive, they have to create cohesion by managing reproductive rights. And that's why when you visit people, even who live in these harsh places, the social fabric is very strong. The social fabric is very, very strong because the environment itself is vast, harsh, hostile, and cruel. So the people have to come together to be able to overcome the challenges in the ecological environment. Then physical protection and survival. So in the context of the harsh nomadic environment, the man-made virginity created by infibulation is culturally justified as a way to protect girls and ensure their cleanliness and respectability in a society where marriage is the only means of economic survival in a difficult landscape. That because they don't have many economic activities, in fact, marriage plays a very important role in bolstering the economy of a family. And when people get married, that's the only chance now a family is able to raise its socio-economic status. So you can see, you'll discover that in these places here, girls are heavily protected, and infibulation becomes one of the ways to ensure that girls marry people they know, people who are known, and people who accept the culture of infibulation, the culture of infibulation. Yeah, then let's now come to the text, from a crooked rib by Nuruddin Farah, from a crooked rib by Nuruddin Farah. So this is the first novel written by Farah, and this is the picture of Nuruddin Farah. And he writes about about Ebla. Ebla, a girl who is more of an orphan, and the grandfather wants to marry her off very early. And Ebla has to run away. He has to run away to town where he sees, I think he sees a cousin. And then from there, she starts her life. She starts her life independent from the parents. So basically in this book, Ebla resists. Ebla resists um, uh, patriarchal domination. But in this particular study, we argue that even patriarchal domination may arise from the ecological environment. So the green forest from a crooked rib, the Somali desert functions as a relentless antagonist that dictates the protagonist's destiny. The novel opens in a harsh, drought-stricken landscape where survival is a zero-sum game, forcing the young nomad Ebla to flee an arranged marriage to an elderly man. Yeah, so she was supposed to marry an old man, and she fled. So this flight is not merely a physical journey, but a desperate escape from cultural ecology that views women as pastoral assets. Yeah, but because the environment is very dry and there are no other assets, yeah, women are now seen as pastoral assets, much like livestock, to be traded for communal survival. And throughout this book, there are passages that really prove that a girl, has no value. A girl is more of an asset. A girl is commodified. The girl is commodified, while the boy is a human person. So women are seen as survival assets in from the crooked rib. Yeah, in the arid resource-scarce Somali desert, livestock is the primary currency. Traditions evolved to view women like Ebla as economic assets. Yeah, they are crooked ribs. They're just like crooked ribs. I think basically it's an allusion to the Quran and also the Bible. But I think in the Quran, they argue that a woman was basically created from a crooked rib, which is straightened, through beating and all that. So crooked ribs whose value is tied to the ability to be traded. So the value of a woman is only compared to dowry to secure communal alliances and replenish herds depleted by drought. So when the father feels that the herds are getting scarce, all they do is to do what? To marry one of the girls, and once they marry them off, they get cattle to replenish the stock that was lost during the drought. So marriage is also seen as a resource strategy. Yeah. So the harshness of the pastoral environment necessitates the tradition of arranged marriages. So marriages are arranged. They're just arranged, just like even someone like Rezian, she's just supposed to be sold to Lois Dori. So they just arranged marriages because of the harsh pastoral environment. Ebla's flight is triggered by an attempt to marry her off to an elderly man, a customary move intended to consolidate wealth and ensure family survival against environmental unpredictability. So the environment is unpredictable. So because of that, girls are there to be married off to replenish the stock so that the family navigates environmental problems, mobility, and physical control. So the nomadic nature of the environment requires constant movement. So cultural rites like female circumcision function as portable mechanism of social control. So they use female circumcision to control women. And once their sexual energy is controlled, they can now be left somewhere for months as men go to distant places to do what? To water their livestock. So this is intended to preserve a woman's purity, marriageability, while the community is mobile across vast and unmonitored territories. And basically, as I've said, it's just meant to make them, sexually passive. So that when the men come back after 6 months or 1 year, these women are just there waiting for them. So it's a means of social control. So you can see that the ecological environment is actually one of the causes of infibulation. That female circumcision is not just because of homocentric ethos, that the ecological environment also dictates. Then the domestic stroke wild binary. So the environment dictates a rigid division of labor. Traditions confine women to the domestic sphere, that's the heart, to manage the immediate needs of the family, while the men interact with the wild. Because the environment is very wild, the men have to be wild, protecting the community from external raiders and external enemies. And then women have to be confined to the kitchen or the home because of the harsh ecological environment. In a place where there are so many lions, we cannot have women being so assertive. Men have to be aggressive to protect the community from wild animals, from the wild. So Ebla's journey to the city is a radical break from ecologically driven spatial restriction. Is a radical break from the ecologically driven spatial restriction. So by moving to the city, she's actually doing what? She's overturning the culture of the community, the duality of water and life. So traditions and the metaphors in the novel are rooted in the scarcity of water. The out of scarcity of water in the novel, so Ebla's search for identity and autonomy is often framed against the backdrop of the desert thirst, where traditional laws prioritize the survival of the collective over the desires of the individual. The survival of the collective over the desires of the individual. So water becomes very, very important. Um, um, and so the traditional laws prioritize the survival of the collective over the survival of the individual. So they have to look for water together. They have to look for grass, for the pastures, for the animals together, because the environment is very, very harsh. So by moving away, she's overturning the culture of the people. So write a term paper to examine the influence of the ecological environment on the way of life of characters in Goulet's Blossoms of Savannah. So that is the assignment. That is the assignment, and I think this should be the last assignment in this unit. And then once you write, you submit. So we apply the tenets of Julian and any other scholar on the to show the importance, the centrality of the ecological environment and how it determines the culture of the people. So this should be the last assignment. This should be the last assignment. And thank you for watching this video.